what I think what like to start with tonight, because we have different experience on this panel, but we also have a lot of overlap. Okay, it is sort of set up nicely in that Mark's the banker guy. Okay, and actually, Mark, I read your bio this morning, and it was really interesting. I hadn't read your bio before. I've known Mark forever, and I realized that back in the good old days, it said Mark raised like 45% of all the capital in biotech. And actually, I think you could probably do that today as well. It would just be a whole lot less money. So that's good. It was impressive, and that amount of money is he doesn't carry around in his pockets though, so don't be tempted. And then in Chris and Tamar, we have a lot of big pharma deal experience, but also people in Chris's case who've now gone over to the small company side and seen it from that side. And in Tamar's side, you live it from the small company side now through JSB and working with companies who hope to have transactions, and hopefully you're doing a lot of transactions. My own background is in doing the work to either support the transactions or scuttle them. So over the years, we have made some friends with people in the banking community. We made some enemies because we're not a transaction firm. We are a commercial assessment, evaluation, and diligence firm. But very quietly, our work has been behind many of the large deals that you've actually seen. And if you haven't seen the deal, our work may have been behind it too, because we may have convinced the company that it was a bad idea. So that's us, and that's my perspective. I have several pages of questions for the panel on a variety of topics. The title here was kind of loose tonight, and it can mean a lot of things to different people. But in our conference call, we talked about the deal space. We talked about licensing trends. We talked about M&A. We could talk about IPOs. We could talk about the situation in big pharma. AstraZeneca, actually stunning, laid off 8,000 people today. 8,000 jobs cut from AstraZeneca. The other thing that was quite fascinating today was there was a press release. I didn't see it, but maybe some of you did, from Pfizer, that they just killed like a ton of programs. And they killed more programs in one day than most pharma companies have. So it's very interesting times going on in big pharma. And since I've been on record and been a public speaker for a while on that topic, we could talk about that as well. I'd like to know what you'd like to talk about. The premise is we may not be the smartest bunch. We're definitely the best looking. But if you have specific burning questions from your perspective, it would be I'll drive the conversation if you like, but if you have questions, we'd love you to fire out and be much happier to answer your questions than just sit up here and just talk at you. Could I just, before I begin then, just sort of get an audience poll, because there's a lot of people here and this is high pressure because we have standing room, so we have to be good. Tell me where you're from. I mean, how many people here from big pharma companies? Okay.
Which one?
Okay. I offend all of them. The more we offend them, the more business they do. How many from biotech companies? How many from the financial side? A little heavier from the financial side. And then how many sort of entrepreneurs, like not quite a company yet, consult? How many consultants? That's good. It's not a lot of consultants. I don't like that. What did I miss? Students? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Then there's Kenyon and Kenyon.
Then there's a few lawyers, huh? How many lawyers? Standing by the bar. Your IP is either very safe here or very unsafe. I'm not sure. Okay. CROs. Okay. Great. Anybody I left out?
Tech
Sorry?
Tech transfer.
Tech transfer. Okay. Okay. Banker. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to start by maybe asking, because I know Jahan gave everybody a little bit of a bio, but just let me ask the panelists to just tell you, first of all, what they're up to now in a little more detail so you can get a little bit more perspective from then, and some of their recent experience and the way they see the world. Just like a minute or two, and then we'll get into some questions. Okay, Tamar?
I will start from the end. At the moment, I am with the transaction team, JSB Partners, and what we're trying to do is help smaller companies to find partners with big pharma if we have no choice, but maybe smaller size pharma and other biotech companies. My qualifications for doing it actually are many years in big pharma and biotech doing transactions. My entire career is business development. It actually started in the chemical industry and then I moved to the pharmaceutical industry. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
I'm president of Enzo Therapeutics for the past 2 years, having come from Roche, Pfizer, and Novartis. I've had about 25 years of big pharma experience, so I guess you'd label me as a big pharma girl. I've done everything from research to clinical development, INDs, NDAs, medical marketing, head of Pfizer's commercial division for diabetes, and then went into business development. I can actually say there is a big difference between big pharma and biotech. In big pharma, of course, everybody likes you and everybody wants to talk to you and everybody wants to invite you to their panels. Once you get into the biotech side, they don't ask me as much as they used to. So there's certainly one big difference there. Right now we're looking to partner our assets. We have a diabetes and an osteoporosis compound that we're looking to partner, as well as some other clinical drugs. And I am happy to meet anyone and all of you. Thank you.
I'm Mark Simon. I currently advise about 10 companies on everything from finance to strategy to buy-side, meeting investors, to sell-side Wall Street analysts, to regulatory to clinical. And then I'm also an advisor to a small firm called Torreya Partners. At Torreya Partners, we advise sometimes foundations on what royalties to monetize and if they should, how they should do it. And we also help companies on business development, and we're also working on several divestitures, either helping a big pharma divest or a small company gain access to a divested product from a larger company.
All right. Well, let's try to kick this off, and I'll kick it off by telling you that Ginny and I were in town today for a series of meetings. One of them was actually with our bank, they asked about the year. It's funny because they have the numbers, but they asked about the year, and I said, well, in some ways, the best thing you could say about 2009 is that it's over. And they asked about 2010, and I said, the trend I see right now in terms of the industry, in terms of financing, in terms of willingness of capital to invest in things, some things, maybe not all things, is better. I think we're seeing a little bit more of an optimistic bent turning into this year. The second thing I'd say is, after spending 4 days at the JP Morgan meeting, I made an observation. I was chatting with one of our clients who's a biotech CEO the other day, and he said there seemed to be a little bit less of a depressed nature, to the conversations I was having. And I said, I think there was less of a cynical nature, and I actually think that's a good thing. So let me ask the panel what your outlook is from the way you see it for the deal space. And we'll take apart the deal space, but when we start apart, I'm going to talk about it holistically. But if you can talk about it in any way you want, okay? But we'll start with maybe the early stage deal space, startup financing, and the like, and then we'll progress down through the stages of development. Okay. What do you think's going on this year?
Start with Mark.
Yeah.
Well,
he was so busy at JP Morgan, you couldn't
Right.
he didn't even answer an email. So.
Early
Right.
stage companies are obviously having a very hard time because the venture capitalists are focused on their existing portfolios. If you look at the average biotech VC firm, they probably are sitting on about 30 private biotech companies. That's plus or minus, but that's pretty much the average of a reasonably sized firm. And they were, of course, many of these companies were started 4, 5, 6, sometimes 9, 10 years ago. They were hoping, of course, for an IPO exit. That, of course, that window has been slammed. It may be opening ever so slightly, but that option has pretty much gone away. And it used to be that anywhere from 25 to 35 biotech companies were bought each year by big pharma. and that number is down. And then a smaller number were bought by the larger biotechs like Celgene, Gilead. So M&A is also significantly down. And some of these VC funds are at the end of their cycle, meaning if they made an investment 9 years ago, they have to get liquidity. The other challenge they're facing is that the endowments that have financed many of the VC firms are, you know from the public disclosure on Harvard, or some of them are really gravely wounded. CalPERS, for example, are looking at a lot of illiquid investments. You even saw Stanford Management, which runs the Stanford Endowment, had proposed selling off its stakes in Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins, which would have been unheard of 10 years ago, to raise capital. And the endowments that were generating money to run the university operations, well, you only generate returns if you have liquidity events. If there's no liquidity events, then you can't put money into the operating budget. So you saw, for example, a number of universities had to borrow money because they had shortfalls. So there's intense pressure on the VCs, and as a result of that, the VCs are really not pursuing a lot of new companies, and in particular early stage companies, because the financing environment is very challenging, meaning if you have a compound or something in preclinical, it may be 5 or 6 years before you get to phase 2. And the universities, the limiteds, the pension funds, the endowments are very impatient. They're not going to wait 5 or 6 years to get to phase 2. So I'm actually involved in a startup at Cornell that was seeded or was kicked off by a luminary at Cornell, and we went to some VCs and we made absolutely no progress. There's no clinical data, so we didn't expect to make progress. But where we were able to raise money is friends of the founder, real estate money, high net worth, angels. So we scraped together about $1 million, kind of passed the hat around. And that's probably enough to at least take us to the next value creating stage. And at that point, we'll have to either go back to the same high net worth people or go back to their network, or at some point go to some of the VCs. Now, I made a generalization. There are several venture capital firms that are doing seed. However, they generally only do seed in their backyard. So for example, Mark Levin started a company called Third Rock, and pretty much their mantra is they will invest in you, but it's got to be in Boston. So, because they can keep a close eye on you, they can monitor what's going on. So, New York does have some VC firms, but the other negative factor, just to get it on the table, is if you're a VC firm and you've got some money to spend, not a lot, because remember that when they put money into a private company, they also allocate future rounds. So they keep reserves to make sure they can keep on, feeding that. But what's happened is there's 350 public companies, and for a while, 100 of those were selling at like $2 a share, or below $5 a share. They basically were orphaned. And a lot of the VCs felt that if you're a public company and $250 million was spent, was basically burned, and there's 20 million in cash left, and the market cap is 22, and you're in phase 2B and you need another $10 million to get across the finish line, and you're public, that's a better place to deploy capital than an early stage target out of Cornell or Sloan Kettering. So a lot of the VC firms are focused on what's called growth equity, or these situations where they think that they're public financings. And the other aspect is, as big pharma is dribbling compounds out, or even businesses out, these VC firms can actually go out and buy businesses. So for example, you saw a new company was started out of Pfizer for a compound called Delbavancin. Pfizer got that company via the purchase of Huron. I think they paid $1.8 billion. And the compound was on the shelf. It was an antibiotic in phase 3. There was real clinical data. There were some issues, that's why it's being divested. So the VCs decided to put, I think, 90 million or some big number into starting a company based on this compound and some other antibiotics. So the VCs can deploy capital now to much later stage what they perceive to be de-risked opportunities. So again, another factor that's kind of hurt the seed. But I am bullish on the high net worth, on angels. The problem is, how many times can you go to them? And there's no way they're going to be able to put 5 or 15 million in. The other positive factor is that there are a number of disease advocacy groups like the CF Foundation, Michael J. Fox, Prostate Cancer Foundation, Spinal Muscle Atrophy, who are very clinically oriented. They're not looking for science, they're looking for translational. They want to see R&D discoveries at the bench get translated into the clinic, and it's probably because somebody wealthy has a son, daughter, mother, father, cousin, whatever, who has that disease. So there actually is a very vibrant disease advocacy network, and there was a conference put on by Faster Cures and Mike Milken back in December, and there were an awful lot of biotech companies, both public and private, meeting with the particular disease advocacy group in the hopes of gaining financing. Even if you don't get financing, access to key opinion leaders is very valuable, because if you go to the FDA on endpoints and you go with the 3 top KOLs from Cornell, Columbia, NYU, and they have a way of getting the answer quickly and they go with you, the likelihood of you getting the FDA to agree on a relatively quick, easy readout goes up significantly. So the disease advocacy structure and the organization has really allowed smaller companies to move more quickly.
Well, I was talking about VCs
Right.
who are holding portfolios of companies where there's no clear
Right.
exit.
Right.
Like, what is the status of those companies? Are they receiving milestone payments? Is there some cash flowing into the VCs from their portfolios?
Again, a very crude generalization, but if a VC has 30 private companies, they're probably putting their chips on 10. They're probably telling the other 10, we'll give you a little bit more money, but you gotta, that's pretty much it. And the other 10, it's probably lights out, and you need to find a home for this or we'll shut it down. So what distinguishes this cycle versus all the cycles I've lived through is we're actually seeing bankruptcies, liquidations. It was always in the past that you can always find another way to raise money. There was always some other person or some other firm or entity that you can keep the company going. Now the VCs are putting some of them to death, or they're forcing some mergers, but they're really making Darwinian calls, and they're telling companies, you've got 3 months to find a home for this, and then we're shutting down.
But I'm sorry.
And that's totally unique, by the way. That really hasn't happened historically.
But of the 10 which they're betting on, what are they betting on? Are they betting on an exit, a sale, or are they betting on milestone payments and holding on and actually managing the company?
Well, there's 2 things that you can bet on. You always hope for the IPO, but that we may have structural changes there. The one thing you hope, which is a dream, it rarely happens, but sometimes it does, you finance to an operating business. Meaning there's enough money in there where where the business can generate enough cash to sustain itself. Like Aisling will say, we're only going to put money into companies where there's a clear pathway to an operating business. But generally speaking, it's what does big pharma want? And as Ed will say, they want relevant clinical data. And it's basically financing to M&A. And M&A could be Japanese companies, it can be European companies, it can be small biotech, large biotech, big pharma, but some financing to an M&A event, or a BD event, by the way. And the VCs are very happy to take a stage deal, where they'll take, if there's $100 million, they'll take, Biogen, for example, bought a company called Syntonix a few years ago. It was $40 million up front, $40 million on another milestone that is about to happen, we hope, and then another $40 million 3 years later. So the VCs are very creative and willing to ride the risk, because the big pharmas want to actually see that the VCs have skin in the game. In the case of Gloucester, which got sold to Celgene, $325 million, because that was an approved product. With the scarcity of new products, they were able to drive a very lucrative auction.
I want to go back to basic. Do you think everything you've just described, Mark, and to get the rest of the panel involved, is it changed this year, or is this we're still the same? Okay, is this 2010 look like a repeat of 2009, or things start to edge up, get a little bit better?
Well, I think that 2009 was a real wake-up call to realize that there are too many companies and that people have been spending money in a totally irrational way. And I think that that's what is happening, is that people are just being much more careful. Many companies, as Mark said, that used to do seed are getting out of the business entirely. They're basically saying, we had enough of pharma, we have enough of biotech, we are going into clean tech, or we're going to India, China, and wherever else, because we feel that the entire healthcare/pharmaceutical space is in a limbo right now. It's very difficult to understand where the industry is going and how they are going to play out. I mean, when you look at the changes that we are going through. I mean, at Novartis, I mean, on one hand, it's a new management. On the other hand, this is about cost cutting. Now, R&D and cost cutting has never been really a very friendly relationship, because the whole idea is to put a lot of money at risk, which apparently is not going to be available. Pfizer probably could cut out 200 more products and nobody would notice. Anyway, so the 100, really, I don't think, it's kind of lip service. I don't think it's going to make any difference. But just the idea that we are acting in an irrational way, that people don't pay attention how they spend money, they don't pay attention what they spend money on. Companies that have been started with very little real logic, and today I think it's changing. So people are much more careful, which is not good for early stage, because that's when you need to be willing to kind of throw marbles against the wall and see what happens. And I think 2009 was the year when all this kind of happened. And my sense is that there still is money being raised, but as Mark said, probably for later stage opportunities. What is interesting for me from where I'm sitting is how much Me Too redirecting and restructuring and reformulating is going on. I remember, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, sitting in a meeting at a large pharmaceutical company when they said, we're only going to do innovative products. If it's not cutting edge, forget about it. It lasted about 2 weeks. Because that means we had to get rid of the entire pipeline, which was really not that cutting edge, and there was really nothing that was available that was late stage enough. So I think that clearly there will be people who will have the stamina to take some of the cutting edge opportunities, and I see them all the time. Cell therapy. It is going to happen, but it's going to happen in 10 years and not in 3 years. And today everybody says, if it doesn't have any impact in 2015, I don't want it. Actually, 2013 is probably So how can you do really innovative stuff that's going to be approved by the FDA within the next 5 to 10 years? It's not going to happen. So the 2010, probably what we are going to see is more kind of baby steps and trying some of these companies, but it's going to be a little bit the same of what happened in 2009, just cleaning up portfolios.
Chris, nobody can accuse your programs of being repurposed or retread or not breakthrough. So how do you see that from the biotech side?
Yeah, well, actually, you must have read my mind, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about, and that is Big Pharma's view of preclinical opportunities. I think years ago it used to be, if you had a great compound and you had the appropriate exclusivity and IP fence around it, and it showed some activity in animal models, it would be very easy to license that in a very license-only royalty milestone structure to Big Pharma. That was very easy 10 years ago. Now, I see that Big Pharma really wants proof of concept. They want to make sure that this actually works. So the risk is actually going now to the biotech companies to prove that, yes, this compound actually does work. Now, let me caveat that people will always be interested in new technologies, new fancy technologies, the Cernas of the world, which you may or may not have a positive opinion about. But people are certainly interested in brand new, exciting technologies and platforms. But the bottom line is Big Pharma now wants to make sure that if you have a compound, that it's going to work in the clinic. So now things are moving more towards clinical development and proof of concept in order to get your prized possession bought or by Big Pharma, bought or licensed. So I think that's certainly a big change in the deal environment.
I think one of the reasons we're focusing on Big Pharma here, and by the way, I'm gonna squeeze myself here into the role of the moderator, but it's everybody knows I'm a big mouth, so they don't ask me to moderate that much. So I'm going to try to moderate. I'm trying to improve my skills as a moderator, so I want your evaluations later on.
You were supposed
in
to
terms
be
of
on the panel.
I was supposed to be on the panel, so I have to get some shots in, at some point or another.
You are
But, right.
moderator.
I'm going to interview myself. So Ed, what do you think? No. So I just, I sense that one of the reasons we always wind up default to Big Pharma, and this is a very interesting discussion. So we started here, with the pub. We started here with early stage financing. We went quickly over IPOs. Okay, there are a lot of IPOs going on right now. I mean, I had a note from somebody in a hedge fund the other day who sends caustic little notes, and he said to me, "Can you believe how many crappy IPOs are being shoved down our throats these days?" He said, and I thought about it, and I said, well, yeah, I can believe it, because there's really no other alternative, because pharma has stopped doing these deals, okay? And so, at some point the water has to flow someplace, right? I mean, it's got to go someplace. I mean, we don't have that many creative financing vehicles, and we have a damn lot fewer than we used to.
What do you mean by pharma
Right.
has stopped doing this?
Right.
What pharma stopped doing? Buying companies?
So here, yeah, so that's
What
interesting.
have they
So
stopped
here's
doing?
what happened, so I think over the past 15 years, if you look at the data and you look through the cycles of financing windows, IPO windows, every time the public got fickle, pharma stepped in, okay? So public investors said, we don't like biotech. Pharma stepped in, okay? Pharma investors said, we love biotech. Pharma was still there, but they weren't as interested in pharma, right? Because you could sell genomics companies for crazy valuations. So at the end of the day, pharma has always been the bedrock buyer for biotech. And in many cases, the money that's coming from pharma far exceeds the money that has come from the public markets, okay? Or from private investment. So I think that the reason, we talk about pharma, okay, so what is pharma not doing? Well, what they're not doing is, as Mark said earlier, they're not doing M&As, nearly as many. I think we saw peaked in 2007. I'm always challenged without my slides because I don't remember the data, but I think somewhere around 2007 these deals peaked. They went down a bit in 2008, and 2009 was ugly, okay? There were very few private M&As by big pharma biotech private M&As in 2009. So, and the man from Mars would land and ask, why is this? Indeed, valuations are pretty attractive, right, on some of these companies. They are. So you'd have to say, and the standard answer you get when you talk to pharmaceutical executives and you say, why aren't you guys doing more deals? Everything's on sale, right? So step up to the plate. And they say, we don't care about the price, okay? Which I think is at best insincere, okay? But actually, when you see some valuations on some of the deals, you might be led to agree.
I think
that
they don't give a price. They
Right.
want to pay as much as possible. If it's cheap, they are not going to step
Not gonna
on
stand it, right, right.
They wait for somebody else to want it,
Right.
so they can get into a bidding war
Right.
and overpay. But if somebody came from Mars, I don't know the day at Mars, on Mars or whatever it is, at
Right.
Mars, in
Right.
Mars, they have the idea of the straight line,
Right.
extrapolation. Maybe on Mars it goes like this, and there is no logic, because
Right.
you're trying to put logic
Right.
in a completely irrational and illogical space.
Well, I think that's
So
completely true.
so saying that there is a trend, I mean, what trend?
You're not going to get an argument from me there, but the data say that,
Yeah,
okay,
but this is like,
Well, then let's do the
like
follow.
data, how can we put the curve so the data proves or doesn't? I
So
think
the-
that pharmaceutical companies for years didn't buy anything.
right,
And they didn't buy anything because it was cheaper, theoretically, to do a licensing deal and less risky. Even today, most companies will say, we would rather not buy it
Mhm.
until we see that it's really worth it.
Right.
And then, if it is, then we're going to buy it.
well, but
There,
this is not,
however,
yeah.
what are they buying? I mean, the problem I see is that if you look at the deals that are being done, logic is not present in any of them. So what happens is you find somebody who falls in love with something, and they magically
Make the numbers work.
right,
Right.
absolutely.
Right.
And when you read about these deals, they made absolutely no sense.
Anything can have positive NPV, I know.
Right.
So, no, but, okay. No, but go
I
ahead.
think just to prove Tamar's point, being that
Yeah.
I'm the banker on the panel, there's a company called Gloucester Pharmaceuticals. They don't make lobsters. They licensed in a HDAC inhibitor from Japan, so it cast off. They paid almost nothing for it. About a year and a half ago, they tried to sell the company, and the product had some what's called herd channel issues, but it was for a liquid tumor that was very severe. The Merrill Lynch bankers were selling it, and I think that they were hoping to get $75 million for it, and nobody would touch it because it had this toxicity, and they weren't sure what the FDA was going to do. So everybody went to the sidelines. Well, it went to the FDA advisory panel last September, and it got a unanimous approval, and the herd channel issue turned out to be an absolute nothing. The FDA didn't care because it's cancer, and it turned out the FDA liked the data a lot. There was a very nice duration of response. So after they got the panel approval, did the company get bought? No. The big guys, big gals, waited till it got the full
Guys.
approval. Guys. And then when it got the full approval, then there was a mass bidding war for it, and it ended up going for $325 million up front and another $250 million of payments. So anybody could have bought this for 10% of the price 18 months ago, but that's not the culture. There's a risk aversion, and as Tamar said, people would rather pay 10 times for the certainty
Right.
than pay 1/10 and be embarrassed and lose your job.
Right. But
And that kind of summarizes, I think, the M&A world and the cultural
Not
aspects.
just M&A, it's true for deals as well. I mean, what I find that today, there are really no people, I mean, business development people used to be a little more risk averse because frankly, they didn't make the final call. So they would bring something to the company and they would be, they were supposed to push it and push the envelope and find out whether they can build consensus around it. Because ultimately the deal supposedly was decided by a consensus. Today, nobody's willing to take that risk. You basically, somebody told me, and I apologize to somebody from Pfizer here, but somebody from Pfizer told me that they should replace the entire licensing team on Pfizer with an answering machine that says, call me in phase 2B.
If you have a product in phase 2B, push 2.
Right, that's it. Otherwise, hang up and don't waste my time.
If you have a
So-
product before phase 2B, push 3, in which case you get disconnected.
That's exactly it.
Or it says call us when you have phase 2B
And even
data.
if phase 2B, it still goes through whatever. I mean, the only way to get anything done today is to generate competition.
Mhm.
Whether it's real or unreal doesn't matter. Companies only start paying attention when they hear that somebody else is interested. And it's very
It's like
sad.
dating.
It's like dating, yeah.
But now I'm gonna be difficult about this. Yeah, as a question, go ahead.
Well, I wonder at some point in time, perhaps for Tamara and Mark, to put this in the context of the State of the Union speech last night. Maybe nobody was there who listened to it, but let's assume that in the next 2 to 3 years, maybe legislation is passed in healthcare, maybe not, but there's going to be ramifications and rippling effects on the pharma industry and the biotech industry. We know pricing is going to be coming down on the hospitals. We know there's going to be continued pressure on the physician community. Within that potential environment over the next 3 to 4 or 5 years, how do you see the pharma industry reacting to be able to get the new compounds that may or may not be able to get reimbursed at a decent level?
They're going for biologics.
Well, but which is
High price.
very, very scary because everybody is investing in biologics and there is absolutely no proof that any of this is going to work because when you look at it, how many biologics actually are significantly changing how you treat patients? You know, I actually think that, and I might be a complete minority of one, the industry will always find a way to develop breakthrough products because that's the nature of inventors. I mean, people are just like that. And they will just learn to do it for less. And the prices are going to change because today there is no doubt that the waste in the industry is just mind-boggling. If you just took the money, if you took the 350 public companies, or I don't know how many there are, and made 100 out of them, and then took the 2,000 private companies and came up, well, maybe we only need 500, that money would go into something a little more likely to lead to a better outcome. I think we will be helped by technology. I am disappointed how slow is the whole biomarker field developing, how slow are diagnostic developing. You know, I happen to work with a company today that has a diagnostic that really can save money to the healthcare industry. No pharma wants to touch it. It's not a pill in the bottle. So, unfortunately, in my opinion, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't do anything. They don't volunteer to do anything. They have to be forced to do it. And I hope I'm not going to be like stoned going out of here, but I think I wish Obama was tougher and just got it to the point where the prices will force people to realize that they can't afford to waste so much money to get to a finish line. You know, we for the last 10 years, all we heard from, was it, which university is doing all this analysis?
Tufts.
Tufts. It cost 500, 600, 700, 800, $1 billion to develop a drug. Are you crazy? I mean, how can you continue like that? Of course, biotech companies don't develop drugs that cost $1 billion to develop. It just doesn't happen. I think that in some way, we have addressed a lot of diseases to the point that now we have to focus on smaller, targets that are more difficult to manage. But with all the technology that we have available right now, and the other part that I hope is going to change is that, it's very frustrating, and I started my career actually in the air pollution control industry. So dealing with government agencies is kind of part of my hobby. But I think that the only way to do it is to work together with them and not against them. And as long as this industry looks at the FDA as the enemy, you're not going to make progress. Because at some point, somebody is going to actually say, oh, patients, oh my God, patients, where are the patients? Do we really care about the patients? And I think when we get there that we really care about that, then you realize that the only way to actually do it is if you work in some sort of collaborative fashion.
The cost control issue has been going on since President Clinton in 1993. And every year it gets tighter and tighter. I take Lipitor, I pay $100 for 90 pills. I get letters saying I should go to
yours. No.
I get letters saying I should go to Zocor, generic Zocor for $10. The best example why the system is working is the President Bush's prescription drug Part D plan was supposed to cost $250 billion, and I think it's now costing $250 million. So it's actually saved $100 billion above what they thought back in 2005. You don't see busloads of Americans going to Canada to buy drugs anymore. I mean, it's the Part D plan is basically the notion that an elderly person has to either do food or drugs. All that is pretty much gone. So the generic side of it, I think, has really solved it. If your drug is not beneficial and doesn't generate value, it's not going to be used, and it's getting tighter every year. But the bottom line is, if pricing does come down, the likelihood is volume goes up because you have China and India coming up. But with the internet, people want access to the latest drugs. So I do see pricing coming down, but in the end, I think it's a wash. I think the area that will be hit the most will be the oncology drugs, where you really do have stratospheric pricing. And in that case, the value delivered is not very clear. And if you go on the website of the NICE, which is the British Pharmacoeconomic Metric System, they're denying reimbursement for a number of anti-cancer drugs. But on the very positive, Genzyme, if you have Gaucher disease in Bolivia, Genzyme's price is supported in 85 countries. Now, they're fortunate enough there's only 2 people in Bolivia with Gaucher's, so the government will pay.
But they can't make the drug.
That's right. So on the genetic diseases, you think that with the average drug costing $250,000 per patient per year, people would be up in arms. There's not a peep about it. You don't have Congress, putting Henry Tamar in front of the panel. Now, granted, Ted Kennedy protected him. But on the whole, I think the whole healthcare reimbursement thing has been vastly exaggerated. And if you would have bought all the dips when everythings were getting scary, you'd made a ton of money. So it's one of the best times to.
But I just need to push back for 1 second on this, because I think it's a good question, and I want to stay on it, because I'm somewhat surprised that all our panelists, okay, I agree with Tamar. I agree that setting the bar higher will make pharma try to leap higher, hopefully. It hasn't really happened too much yet. I think what we're missing here is the P word, which is portfolio, okay, and how pharma companies invest money across a portfolio of risk. So if you're, say, AstraZeneca, and you today can't do Nexium, which was, if you do the risk-adjusted return on Nexium, it's astronomical, absolutely astronomical, that allows you from a portfolio place to do a lot of other things that seem a little wacky. Okay, then you could go to Chris's program and say, your program looks great. Okay, we'll take a flyer on that, because look at what we're getting over here, okay? And so what I'm concerned about the impact of whether we get reform in this iteration or whether we, is the fact that we've taken away the layups, okay? The layups are away, and pharma.
Is layups a sport term?
Yes,
I do not
basketball.
understand.
Basketball.
Sorry, what's a
A layup is when you stand underneath the basket and you're 7 feet tall and the basket's like 8 feet, so you just reach up and put the ball in.
Oh,
Okay.
so
Slam dunk.
Right.
So it's
Right.
like
Whereas a
competitive advantage.
yes, absolutely, yes. Nexium is a pharmaceutical layup, okay? It's the same exact thing as the drug it replaced. It marches through to approval. The commercial challenges at the time it were launched were fairly insignificant. You convert the whole market, you keep the franchise going, and that allows you to
What's the value
spend
the patient?
zero.
Not-
Right, but my point, I come back to the
Raised
point.
by-
No, but my point comes back to, do pharma companies, one of the reasons that I think pharma companies are running away from these deals now is because the risk-adjusted return on their portfolio has changed. And that is, in my opinion, why they are selling generics in emerging markets. Because selling generics in emerging markets is not as good as Nexium, no way as good as Nexium, but it is a way to attempt to risk balance, okay? What they hopefully are gonna need to do to clear the bar for higher priced therapeutics, which will now be lower priced, by the way, so the risk starts to look a little bit scarier on those. So it's a very good question, but I agree with Mark that I think that it's not like we're in a binary world where one day we didn't have reform, and no, this has been going on for years and years and years and years.
I mean,
and years.
Crestor sales are rising very nicely in spite of the Zocor generic.
Mhm.
So with managed care, which is brutal if you are on some of these drugs, or it can be brutal. I mean, when I was on Lipitor, they said that they would send me a pill cutter, and I can order, the 40 milligram and cut it in two, so I got, 20 milligrams, for 2 days instead of the 40. But anyway, Crestor sales are growing in spite of a terrific generic called Zocor,
Mhm.
and the reason why is Crestor has great data.
Yeah.
But you see,
So
that's
data-
the thing.
data is driving it.
Data is driving it. The other thing is that there is no doubt in my mind that there are different patients responding differently
Exactly.
to those drugs. So there is a reason why there are different drugs on the market, and I think there should be new drugs being developed, even though they look like Me Too.
Eli
But-
Lilly is launching a new statin called pitavastatin.
Right. If we were able to have
Kidding me.
the diagnostic or the biomarkers to actually tell the patient, I mean, there is no reason not to have 10 statins, but why do a patient has to go through the pain and agony to discover that 8 of them that don't work for him and the 11th does? So, but the focus is not there. The focus is how can we squeeze as much money from what we have today rather than trying to find ways around it. And ultimately, it's going to change. I'm sorry, there's a question.
Yes.
Both the question and the statement. It seems to me that one of the big problems coming from a marketing perspective, the pharmaceutical industry has, it's been made to be the scapegoat, and it hasn't responded in an effective way. I mean, a couple of people like Novartis have run radio commercials, but their response from a public relations point of view has been awful, and quite simply, the data shows that many, like 1 out of every 3 Americans, doesn't take the pills they're prescribed to anyway, which of course probably skews the results of, the drug test. And the industry as a whole needs to think about its public perception, because one thing that the last 3 elections have proven is not that the Republicans are going to get in power, but the whole country is sick and tired of the same old, same old. The other question I sort of have is, so I'd like to comment on that. The other question I have is if like Bill and Melinda Gates are doing all the things they're doing in Africa with drugs, and the pharmaceutical companies are able to produce new drugs at a relatively low price to distribute, why can't they take that same technology and produce it here? And I mean, not produce it, but for example, GE has invented a device to do cardiograms in India that they can do a cardiogram for $1. In the United States, it costs about $100. When they thought about bringing it to the United States, everybody said, no, don't do that. So that's sort of my 2-part question is, Where's the
Because
industry?
Tamar says they want to pay more. That's
I
why.
mean, well, because how are you going to make money
Right.
with a cardiogram that's $1? It's the same thing with MRI.
course, if it
I think
costs you
in
10
Japan
cents,
you
you
can
make
get an
money.
MRI for $100.
No, but he said if it costs you 10 cents, you'll make money.
They
You
have
only
to
make
have
90
They're
cents. You want
making
to make
the
$9
margin
a
on
month.
cardiogram
You're still
in
making
India
it,
is
the
very
profit
high.
margin is still 90%.
But it's not enough. Because
Okay.
with a 90-cent profit margin, you cannot support. I mean, the truth is that you can't support drug development with profits at the 90 cent per unit.
There's limits to relative.
First of all, there's
So-
much lower labor costs, there's no malpractice. You know, they're paying the
No.
nurse 5 cents an hour. I mean, if you actually look at it, and there's probably a false error rate, but they put the electrodes on. So if you do that for $1 in the US and you miss someone's EKG,
You're dead.
you'll be sued and you'll be out of business.
No, I
So,
understand.
I don't think it's,
But the principle is, you know, if like Bill and Melinda Gates are funding drug development.
They're
and-
not really funding I mean, how many drugs that they found are today on the market curing people? I mean, you know, it's a great hype, and I think they're doing a fantastic job, but they're probably doing a better job installing, you know, I don't know, running water or clean water than developing drugs. You know, when you look at something like TB, for example, I mean, they clearly are working on a lot of drugs, but they are nowhere to be seen in terms of actually being out there market. The biggest problem with drugs actually is delivering them to their users.
distribution is the challenge.
Distribution is the biggest challenge. And that's where, and you know, even Bill and Melinda Gates are running out of money. I mean, they already
Distribution's a
said,
challenge in Brooklyn. I mean, if you look at the number of people that get vaccinated, the number of kids, it's very low there. It's not that the vaccines are not available, it's not that the vaccines aren't cheap, for the pediatric vaccines, it's the distribution.
Just not that I want to make a big show.
Or
but-
the
yeah.
compliance. I mean, Bill Clinton took Zocor for his high cholesterol, went off it, and had bypass. So there's a very smart man who actually decided my cholesterol's down, I can go off Zocor.
yes, but you see, I think that what is amazing is that when you skip a cholesterol dose, you can say, okay, but there are people who skip their drugs when they have transplant.
Right.
I mean, I was just talking to somebody about lung transplant patients. They are developing a new drug and they're assuming 50% compliance, and that's high.
I mean, managed care wants compliance,
Right, everybody
but
wants
then they lose the
compliance.
value. I mean, the thing about cholesterol is,
When I was at big companies, there were departments whose role was to figure out how can we raise compliance on our drugs. And they would be disbanded very quickly because there virtually is no way, especially in diseases that you don't see immediate impact. It's difficult to force people to be compliant.
I think Tamar said something very interesting, which is if you look at all the statins, they reduce death, myocardial infarction, stroke, bypass, angioplasty by about 40%. Does that mean the other 60% have a different disease? Are they not responding? Are they not having that reduction in all of the clinical events because they actually may have elevated cholesterol, but there's actually, the disease is doing something very different. So is high cholesterol really multiple diseases? As Tamar said, the issue of personalized medicine. Because clearly a lot of patients benefit, but there's clearly, it's not reducing events 80%. So that means that within the cholesterol area, there's probably subtypes of disease that we don't know about. So we have to, as she said, prospectively identify who will benefit from Crestor and who will not benefit or who can be harmed in terms of the muscle elevations.
At the risk of, I know we're moving sort of all over the place. I don't want to get everybody back involved, but there was one hanging observation about the industry's image, and it's something I've spoken about for years. So, we make one or two observations for anybody that's interested. First of all, I actually think the pharmaceutical industry's image is actually inversely proportional to the fortunes of the industry. So, in other words, as the stocks go down, the reputation of the industry is actually improved, and part of the reason is healthcare reform and/or Part D. The principal issue with the reputation of the industry has been caused by two things, and really only two things. One, lack of access to medicines and high exposure to cost, okay? And two, DTC advertising. Both of these are going to decline, and in fact, indeed, already have. DTC advertising is already less effective, okay, because it's been blunted by the 3-tier copay system. So it doesn't matter that the patient asks the doctor for the drug by name, because the doctor says, I can prescribe it for you, but my formulary computer here says it's on tier 3, and it's going to cost you $100 when you go to the pharmacy. As a very good generic I could use, why do you want that? So we're going to see less DTC advertising. And that's a benefit for the publicity and the PR of the industry. Secondly, the fact that hopefully they're focusing back on innovation to some degree, and are going to need to be bringing out, I hope tomorrow's optimism is borne out. I agree with it. I'm sort of an optimist on the fact that they'll have to figure their way out of it, and it probably will. And so we're going to see some good new drugs for which people in the main have coverage. Okay, so I think in the end, and if they close the donut hole, okay, which exists now under healthcare reform, it's going to improve the industry's image every more. People don't hate drug companies. People hate prices for drugs, which is the highest issue. They hate the fact that the U.S. price is substantially higher than the rest of the world. But as Mark pointed, we don't see the convoys of buses going into Canada anymore. So that problem, to some degree, has been addressed. And we're seeing less DTC advertising, which is, made the industry sort of a laughingstock. So, I think in the end, I'm optimistic about the image of the industry. It'll be good. Unfortunately, the companies are not going to be as strong or as powerful as they once were.
And the Europeans are rebelling against their turndowns of drugs.
Right.
As are the Canadians. They come here.
But if I just can add to that, you see, I agree that the reason DTC advertising is in the dumps is because there's only one area that has really absorbed the most money, and that's all the sexual.
Yes.
If you take that out, I actually think that
Let's remove the 4-hour erection from the
right. If you take that out and think about what DTC has done for depression, what it has actually done for cholesterol, I actually think that we see drugs today. For example, I just mentioned earlier, there is this diagnostic that can distinguish between tremor and Parkinson's. I think it's a fantastic DTC campaign, because people need to be aware that when you have tremor, you have Parkinson's or you don't, etc. Unfortunately, we have to undo all the damage that has been done to the industry because all the sexual dysfunction ads. So that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is that, I have always been baffled. Drugs are not what makes the healthcare bill in this country so high. They're nothing. In fact, just the opposite. More drugs, it would cost less. If, I just happened to take some course at Princeton that talked about healthcare, and the guy was telling, who is a very well-known person, he said he went to visit Canada, and he visited a hospital with like 1,500 beds, which is gigantic. So they visited, they spent the whole day there, and then the guy said at the end of it, well, where is the billing department? It's like, we don't have a billing department. We have 2 guys coming in at the end of the month and doing all the billing. Now, in a 1,500 bed hospital in the United States, there would be 600 people doing billing. But that's true.
I know.
That's absolutely
I know.
true. So drugs have nothing to do with personal health care. And when you look at the fraction of the cost that is even the legal issues, that's not where the money is. The money goes into the bureaucracy of the insurance companies.
Right.
If you could take half of that money, put into drug development, things would look good. There is a question somewhere
In the back.
in the back.
Yeah, I have a deal-making question.
Yes.
Imagine you have a small biotech company with a phase 2 product. You want to cut a deal with big pharma or big biotech to fund further development, clinical trials, et cetera. Typical situation. Okay, are they better off, or let me put it this way, what are the pros and cons of using an intermediary like, I guess, JSB Partners, as distinct from their own management team approaching big pharma, big biotech directly to try to make such a deal?
Are you a plant?
I'm a venture capital
You know this guy?
No, because I actually think it's a very interesting, because I would like to battle it out with Mark, whether you should, first of all, using or not using an intermediary is a little bit of a function whether your management team is experienced and connected in the industry. Because I talked today with the CEO of a biotech company who knows more people in the industry than I do. So he can probably open, every door available.
Yeah, but they all hate him.
They hate me too. But they hate anybody who wants to give them cheap drugs, cheap projects. But I think there is also a difference when you use an intermediary, whether you use a transaction team or a banker, which I think is what I personally struggle with, because I don't think bankers know nothing about doing licensing deals. They are perfect for selling companies. So if you want to go out there and sell your company, hire a banker. But when you fail to sell the company, don't come to me. Because a failed project like that, you can't do anything with it until you have the next milestone.
Mm-hmm.
So if you reach a positive milestone, you can go back and say, okay, they didn't know what they're doing, they hired a banker, they screwed up, but now look at the great data that they have. We can do something with it. So that's one aspect of it. In terms of whether you do it internally or not, people don't realize how much work it is to partner a product. And I actually didn't realize when I was in Big Pharma that the whole concept of let's focus doesn't really work. Because what we used to do, and we were on the other side, if we were licensing something else, we were on the same side of the table, but we would say, well, let's focus which 10 companies would be good partners for this particular product. It was a huge mistake. When I came to JSB, I realized that you should ask yourself which 100 companies could be good partner for this. Because you have no idea where your partner is hiding.
Mm-hmm.
And very often it's better off to, the idea of getting $100 million upfront payment on a phase 2 product, etc. It happens. I mean, look at how one of my alma maters just did the deal for $80 million with 7 patients. How crazy can it get? That's an example of
That's
how
a good
crazy it
return
can
per
get.
patient.
Absolutely. But most of the time, it is going to be a rational deal, which is why there are many companies out there with money who can do it.
Let me ask Chris, because you sat at the negotiating table for lots of years, pending that at Novartis. Did you have a preference for whether you dealt with the internal management team of the company or you dealt with a hired hand? Did it matter to you? Did you see it from that side?
Well, let's put it this way. From the negotiation point of view, it was really the skill set of the person who was on the other side of the table that mattered. So it really didn't matter, as Tamar is saying, whether you are the third party or whether you're actually from the company. I always like to talk to the company because they're the ones that knew the product.
Mm-hmm.
They knew the pluses and minuses. They knew the holes in the data, and they had the best perspective on what had to be covered in terms of things that could go wrong, and of course those kinds of things had to go into the contract, and sometimes there was money associated with those. If it had some sort of target product profile, for example, that could go one way or the other. Certainly everyone focuses, and Big Pharma has always focused on what is the unique selling point. What is this compound going to do that's better than the generic out there? So that's always been a upfront thought from the Big Pharma perspective. So actually, I don't think Big Pharma has changed very much, to be very honest, over the years in terms of what they're looking for. They're looking for something that makes the difference to the patient, something that's better. And now the question is, it has to be better than the generic. Before, it had to be better than perhaps the other branded compound. Now, it's got to be better than the generic. So I don't see any differences.
If you ask me this question as a Big Pharma person, I would tell you that I would prefer not to have a banker on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
But just like we said, I want somebody competent.
Okay.
somebody that understands what due diligence is.
So let
Somebody
me-
who understands when I go to do due diligence, what is it that I expect
Okay.
to find.
So let me stay on this topic for a minute, and I'll give Mark the opportunity to defend bankers in a second, but.
There's no chance.
Oh, okay. But,
I fled.
okay, but let me just stay on the big pharma theme for a minute. So Chris, and it's fairly recently you were at Novartis. What were sort of the three things? Because I think there's a lot of interest from the deal space. Getting into that question. What were a couple of the things that would make you cut and run and head for the hills when somebody came in? Are you, aside from bad personal hygiene, or what things would sort of drive you crazy?
Particularly when they didn't have a good handle on their IP. I think exclusivity is one of the big check marks that Big Pharma looks at. And no one is going to pay for something that can be infringed with someone else. So I think exclusivity and IP is certainly the key issue. I think that the companies actually should have had a very good sense of the competitive landscape. That would not make me, however, go away just because they were incompetent in their marketing. It also didn't make me go away if they were incompetent in their development program, because Big Pharma has that expertise. We know how to develop drugs and we know how to market them. So if you don't know how to do it, that's okay, I don't care. Some of my people on my team, of course, found that to be a problem, but as far as I was concerned, I was buying IP. I was buying something that could be protected and that could sell. Pfizer actually had a very a very succinct way of looking at things. There were only 3 questions. This is the old Pfizer, by the way. There was only 3 questions that really mattered. Does it work? Is it safe? And can I make it into a billion-dollar drug? Not is it a billion-dollar drug now. Not do I have all of the check marks in the target product profile now so that it's a billion-dollar drug. But can I make it into a billion-dollar drug? And if you have those 3 things in the front of your mind, you can probably figure out on your own whether or not you should be talking to anyone about licensing.
I just wanted to answer one question about when to use an advisor, because I actually am in 2 camps. I have my own consulting firm where I'm more passive, where I advise companies working on BD deals how to get it done. And then for other companies that are not strong internally, with some friends of mine will actually help them try to get a deal done. I think if you have a very unique technology that does not fit neatly into a box, I do think an advisor can really help, because what I have seen is when you send in the teaser to a big pharma or a big biotech, they have to figure out where to put it. Where does it go? So if it comes into Merck in White House Station, does it go to this lady in San Francisco? Does it go to somebody in Cambridge? Does it go to the UK? So you really, and if it's a complicated story, if it's like a small molecule that does something unusual
They didn't hear that.
in a new disease area, that's where I do think an advisor can be very helpful, because they can basically say, hey, this is what it does, and you need to really check your network, who's got the expertise here. I actually ran BD at Amicus Therapeutics, and we did a very large deal with Shire, and we had a very complicated technology that didn't lend itself to a one-pager, and at several big pharmas, when it was sent in, it got misallocated.
But you didn't have Harrison Ford on your team at that point.
We knew the movie was coming. So in fact, there's a movie about the CEO of Amicus that just came out. It's a sad story about his 2 kids with Pompe disease, but that's another topic of discussion. But so I do think an advisor, that's where I think an advisor is very helpful, because if it's a unique story, these BD people are bombarded with 2, 4, 5, 6 a day, and the piles on their desk of BD proposals and available products. I mean, every investment bank is trying to sell probably 30 or 50 small companies on any given day. And now to answer Ed's question, I do think, and I think Tamar said it, I left banking because I actually enjoyed the BD process while I was at Citigroup, because that was much more intellectually invigorating than talking to somebody about, okay, your stock is 10, Do you want 15 or 17? Who do you want to stay? Who do you want to go? In M&A, there's very short number of questions to negotiate and answer. In BD, when I was at Amicus, we were talking about who would run the CME courses, you know, who would pick the faculty. I mean, the granularity on BD, if you have a co-promote, there's an infinite number of variables. So personally, I found the BD situation much more invigorating. The only investment bank that I think really does a good job in BD is Lazard, in terms of classical investment bank. All the rest want to do the M&A because they get paid on the M&A. Now, at Terea, we try to structure our deals that if there are milestone payments, we still get a piece of the action. The investment banking firms are not staffed up to get future payments. It's got to come in one fell swoop. So the whole investment banking compensation system, incentive system, does not lend itself to BD. BD is very time consuming. And I know we get called, actually at Terea, by quite a number of biotech companies who ask us to audit why the M&A or BD process failed. And what's amazing is that some of these larger banks go to the wrong people at the big pharmas or the biotech, so this is stale. And it just basically, they just try to sell 30 or 40, I mean, in any given day, I would say most of the banks are trying to sell 30 plus companies, and they can't even tell what they have in their inventory. And that's why you don't hear about the failed processes, but I will say this, for every successful M&A process that you read about in the paper like Gloucester, there's probably 25 that have failed.
Absolutely.
And for every one BD deal that you see get across the finish line, there's probably 5 or 10 that have failed. So you don't see the failures. But Tamar made one critical point, which is I wanted to raise here. If you go out prematurely, without that proof of relevance, without your real data, without the story fully baked out, without the picket fence on the IP, without being careful, and you get a red light, you can't change it. So one of the things that we do at Terea, or I do personally, is I advise companies, don't hire anybody, you're not ready. And if you go out prematurely, you're going to damage the future prospects. Because once all these pharma companies have elaborate tracking systems, so once it's rejected, it's logged in why it's rejected, so therefore you really need a lot of data to get somebody to reconsider. So the timing of
And
BD.
as soon as you tell them that they hire somebody to be a senior vice president of business development
Yep.
to go out prematurely.
Yeah, I mean, I can echo that, and that's a very important point. I know there are a couple more questions, so I'll get them before the time is up. But you know, we do a lot of focused, targeted searches for big pharma companies where we're not a bank, but we actually go out and identify assets for companies, and we're quite busy doing this. It's probably 40 or 50% of our business. The number one objection when I bring an asset to a client is, that's been shopped around. That's the number one objection. And there are times I actually have to pause and I have to say, yes, so, does that mean there's anything wrong with it? Well, yeah, no one else has taken it, okay? I mean, I think
Right.
there is an overwhelming and probably improper amount of respect, and this goes to some of the very interesting things that I think Tamar was saying earlier. In big pharma companies, it's really not that rational in the end, because, you know, everybody respects everybody else's due diligence, okay? And I think sometimes too much, and they respect them. So there are opportunities out there, if you're a buyer, that actually aren't half bad. But the issue is they've been rejected, okay? And this is a very, very difficult market, because the minute you get that sort of situation in a pharma company and you get that asterisk on your program, you're competing with another, 1,000 that don't have that asterisk. And that's the problem, okay? So it is a very critical piece of advice. If you leave here and you're an early stage company, and it's easy for us to say it because unfortunately, most companies don't really just want to go out and sell, right? I mean, at some point they'd like to keep the asset, they'd like to keep developing it, but reality, intervenes. But it is time for a very, very, it is so much better. And how many times have you sat on panels where you've heard, stop talking about dilution, forget about it, okay? If the asset isn't ready, don't shop it. Don't shop it, because if it gets marred with that, it's going to be, you're going to go back until you get, you said it exactly right, until you get to the next milestone, okay? And then you can sort of reinvent it. But, if you're gonna have the money to do that, you wouldn't be selling it in the
But
first
the next
place.
milestone has to be relevant to
Exactly.
solve the problem, why
Exactly.
they've passed the first one.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
usually it's not.
Yes. So we have a few minutes and there's a few questions, so,
I
yes.
just wanted to make two quick comments. Disclaimer, I represent startups, so I'm on the advisory kind of consultancy side. Many startups don't realize how many internal CPU cycles it will take to actually shop their product. And many times they drop the ball while trying to shop it, and some other competitor comes on the scene and surpasses them. The other thing is that for many of the scientists and engineers, this is going to be the deal of their lifetime. And trying to negotiate that with a pharma or with a biz dev, somebody biz dev in pharma who's done 20 or 30 of these deals over the course of their career, it's just the skills don't match. So I'm a big advocate for actually engaging an investment banker or an attorney or some consultant to do the legwork for you. And not to mention that engineers and scientists are not necessarily the best negotiators and business people, nor should they be.
We wholeheartedly agree. Any other questions? From the audience? Yes?
What's the next step for the industry and for you guys?
So next step for the my next step, do you want to buy a really nice consulting company? I mean, there's a lot of beaches in the world. Actually, years ago, we concocted a lot of good ideas at DefinedHealth, but one of the best ideas we ever concocted was this business where we would do virtual retirement for people who have so much money that they don't need to work, but they're still working. We came up with this for Fred Frank. Fred, why are you still working? You don't need to work, okay? So we'll go and live in your houses and send you reports. And now with Twitter, it's perfect because you can tweet on Twitter. So I just played golf today and it was great. So I don't know what my outlook is. So I'm still having fun. What do you guys think?
Talk about the patent cliff and what's coming. You already started talking about it over the next couple of years. I think that's where you want.
So for the industry,
Is that what you meant?
I actually
Yeah.
think what proactive
Yeah.
measure could the industry take, or could an entrepreneur
Yeah.
or a hopeful change maker make to transform what seems to be a very hairy situation to something that's a little bit more promising?
Innovate. I think this industry is going to be very badly in need of innovation, regardless of the fact that the return on that innovation may be less attractive in the entity. So unless the industry is going to completely retool and sell tires or something else, it's going to have to sell therapeutics. It's going to have to sell good drugs. We need innovation. I met with a lot of venture capitalists during JP Morgan, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I sat there, and despite all the things that Mark said, which is totally true, what I heard from VCs was, no, we're going way back to the beginning, okay? We want to fund innovation. We want to do really great stuff. We want to make a difference. I'm saying, are these the same people I talked to 2 years ago who were saying, we want to out-license, we want to in-license stuff that pharma companies are rejecting, take it up through a phase 2B trial and flip it back to a pharma company, okay? That was the model du jour. That's what everybody wanted to do. And you know what? The returns on it have frankly sucked, okay? There are a couple of people like, Eckhard Weber and, people who are domain who are spectacular at doing this, and they're great. But most people can't do this, okay? And for all the successes you see, there are 100 failures. So now the VCs are all on this team. We got to fund innovation. We need to get back. And actually, I think what you need to do, if you're an entrepreneur, is I think you have to be, as always, but even more so, creative in being able to sustain yourself and raise money. And somebody was talking earlier today about Ron Cohen at the Court of Therapeutics. He's got approval for their MS drug. And somebody actually said something maybe not all that flattering about Ron, but I guess if you were Ron, you'd consider it a compliment. It's like he's really a tough son of a gun. This is a business in which if you're an entrepreneur, you got to really want to make it happen. This is not easy. Getting a drug to market is an insane thing.
But the point is that everybody,
Right.
every step of the way, there was a 50-50 chance at least that it's going to
Absolutely,
fail.
absolutely.
Until the very last moment.
Right.
So, you can't be weak-hearted for
Exactly.
that type
Right.
of experience. But I think that, the cliff is going to come, and patents are going to expire, and the industry is going to readjust. They just have to deal with it because there is no other option. And that's why, there is really nothing out there that's going to get this cliff go away. And that's what people are saying. We want something that has an impact in 12 to 13. I mean, what do you mean about impact? You're losing $1 billion in sales, and you're going to have something with $25 million. Is that going to do it? No. So it's totally irrelevant. There's going to be a huge upheaval in 2013 and 14.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that the world is not going to be there in 2025. So people
It just looks different.
yeah.
Yeah. Anybody, Chris, Mark, you want to get in? Because that's going to be our last question. We're a little past time, so.
Good, Chris.
I think in terms of looking at Big Pharma, as was said before, you only have one chance to make a first impression. And that's a mantra that the old Pfizer leadership used to say. So I think as you entrepreneurs and startup companies are trying to push forward your brand new baby, I think it's smart to really sit back and say, okay, does it work? Is it safe? And how can I make it big? Now, you're not going to be able to make it $1 billion anymore, and that's not the hurdle anymore, but is it going to make a difference? And is it going to be better than generics? And I think people will always get sick, right? People will always die, and there will always be a market. So drug development will always be. It'll take different forms. As is very clear, I think many people are going now to biologics because it's high priced and because of the patent situation is a little bit tougher. But people like to take pills that they can swallow. They don't like to go to doctor's offices and get injected or infused.
Absolutely.
And I think that although primary care is still an area where it's become second child now, it's the part where people want to go. It's what the patient really wants to take. So I think small molecules is really still here to stay, even though there's a lot more press about biologics. So so I think in summary, it's got to make a difference to the patient, and if you can do that, you have something that goes forward.
You want the last word?
Yeah, this is my 26th year in biotech, so it started in '83, so I missed it by a year when I came out of college at Columbia. But Michael Milken said what's great about this industry is the intellectual capital, the human capital that the industry has spawned and created. So now that the industry has been around for 1 or 2 generations, the opportunity for entrepreneurs to tap into us, tap into the people who are leaving Genentech because of Roche, the people who were laid off at AstraZeneca today. I mean, the opportunity for anybody starting a company to tap into instant expertise that are veterans that have done it is phenomenal. The opportunity with the web to find out who the KOLs are in any disease area. If you've got something that's, whether it's a biomarker, a surrogate marker, the NIH has a whole biomarker consortium. I mean, it's really very easy to figure out who the experts are in your disease area. These disease advocacy groups, if you have even a signal in Parkinson's, Michael J. Fox will take your call, they'll vet it for you,
You don't even need Michael J. Fox. It will be on every Parkinson patient will have it on their website within 24 hours.
So the internet is, again, a great enabler. So if you look at the barriers 25 years ago in the industry, it was very hard to actually do this, to figure out who to even call. Who's an expert in clinical trials in cardiovascular or reperfusion injury. It was as an ex-research analyst, it would take hours or days or weeks to figure out who to talk to. Now it's instantaneous, and now that a lot of people have seen a lot of success and a lot of failure. So if you look at the people coming out of Genentech, I think they're going to spawn a lot of new companies, a lot of new innovation. You look at the 9,000 from AZ, not all of them are fantastic, but some of them have 20 years of medicinal chemistry experience or optimization. So whatever your challenges are, the likelihood is you'll be able to find an entity or a group that can help you solve that problem much more easily than 20 years ago. So I'm actually very bullish on it, and I hope the U.S. keeps its competitive edge.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and Moderator, I'll have the last word, but I mean, I totally agree. I'll only say that, and something actually that I hadn't been thinking about, which is that, yes, it's brutal out there in terms of capital. Hopefully 2010 will be better than 2009. I don't think it can be any worse. I don't think it will be any worse, and it might be better. But Mark's race, I mean, that's a great point. You know, there has not always been, while capital challenges come and go, and these are pretty severe, there has never been a time where there's this much access to this much intellectual talent in this business. And for entrepreneurs, that means it's great. So hang in there, because I think the financing will get back in one form or another. And then you're enriched by all of the things that you wouldn't have had, you know, 2 decades ago. Certainly ready access to. So on that note, I think we're over, and we probably should just network a little bit, because that's what they said. I want to thank all the panelists, and thank you all for